Hello, I'm your host, Mr. Insomniac. I'm sorry that it took so long for me to upload. It's been a little sad, but I'm back. It has been a very difficult month since her accident. Trying to remember now, I can't recall a single moment of the funeral. Not a single one. I asked one of her friends how I reacted. They said I just stood there with my gray suit on looking at the casket, astonished. Several days were necessary until I realized that I lost her. The fact would not get into my mind. It was just so out of my comprehension that my head simply just hoped it was not true. But it was the most veritable and raw experience of my life. That day, she was driving her way to work, on the same road, in the same hour, and probably listening to the same playlist when she passed away. She had a cup of tea that morning. She usually drinks coffee. I gave her my last kiss right after saying, "See you later, alligator," to me while I was reading the paper. A drunk driver crashed frontally in her car. The man died instantly, but the doctors told me that she struggled and bled for about 8 minutes until her death. Some pieces of the engine crushed her legs and punctured her belly. They said that even if the emergency had arrived instantly, she would have died anyways. She did call 911 though. She also called me. They saw on her phone that she called me before she called 911. I was in a meeting, so I did not answer her. I can't recall what my last words to her was, and I think every day what she would have said to me if I answered the call. After the funeral, I sat patiently in the cold white waiting room of the hospital. The doctor who tried to reanimate her and the legist doctor called me to meet them at the hospital. I don't know why they explained it all to me. I don't know what they were thinking of showing the pictures of the accident and explaining to me how exactly she died. They gave me a tour of all the details of her death. Perhaps they were trying to make me feel better by disenchanting me of the aura of her death. I would give anything to forge those pictures. Casually, I would often bite the skin on the top of her knee, just to see her laugh and try to get me off of her. When I had the chance, I would wake her up with little bites on her knee. It was wonderful to see her awakening with that laughter. That laughter filled me with so much joy every day. I could see the same knee that I bit now, blood red and mashed of bone and meat. I loved to put my hand on her belly before going to sleep. I used to feel the softness of her skin, and it would feel great knowing that the biggest treasure of my life was by my side. I saw her belly slashed by a metal chunk. Blood and feces dropped by her hanging intestines. When I first fell in love with her, I could not get her face out of my head. When I was going to bed, the only thing that kept me awake was the memory of her sweet and fishy smile. I fell in her lap crying when she firstly said, "I love you," to me. I believed that it was the happiest day of my life. When we kissed, I liked to open my eyes just to see her expression. Her lips were so warm and tender that I felt like the luckiest person in the world when she surprised me with a kiss. In those pictures, I saw her face violently slammed against the car panel. Her jaw broke and her eyes were full of blood. Her mouth was just hanging piece of skin dripping with blood. The fact that she managed to get a phone call to me in that situation makes me feel despicable to have ignored her call. I can't physically and mentally describe anymore of what was in those photos. I fell ill right after the day they showed me that. The mourning, the hopelessness, the pure sadness almost killed me. The only reason I didn't commit suicide was because of her. She often talked to me about that. She would never be happy with my end that way. Before I met her, I could not see any sense in life. I was almost giving up when she reminded me of what life was worth living for. Every moment that I lived with her was special. Her kindness and her care had changed my perspective of life. Every little detail of life with her was so special. I remember how she always made me laugh when she sensed that I was down. Her effort to make people happy around her was remarkable. She had many friends. All of them loved her very much too. Her death was a tragedy for many, many people. When we talked about death or life sense, she would never bring up her death. She'd always say, "I would never die," with that arcane and subtle smile that only she had in the whole world. I never seriously thought about her death. It was a fact in my mind that I would die before her. My life was complete with her. She was always there for me, and I was always happy to be there for her. She helped me grow. Almost everything that gave me pleasure had some kind of involvement with her. Now, I cannot do anything or look at anything without remembering her. I can even smell her skin and perfume when I'm alone. I had to get rid of most of the furniture and decorations in the house. She would probably be mad with me, but everything had her little touch. The touch that made everything so fucking special. I never liked colorful things and ornaments around the house, but see her happy decorating our home and putting her little magic flourish on our things. It made me happy as well. We built a cozy apartment over the last few years, and now it was just a cold couple of rooms with nothing more than grief and sorrow scattered all over the floor and the walls. It hurts me. It hurts me very much to go to the living room and not seeing her doing yoga, or going to the kitchen and not seeing her making a surprise dish for our dinner. It hurts very much to know that I would never see her again. When we met, we thought that it won't be possible for us to be together. But destiny has some ways to find the right path. We broke up a couple of times, but we always got back together. Life was empty and shallow when she was far from me. Life was brighter and cleaner with her. I felt safe and loved when thinking about her voice. I always thought about that love was bullshit. It all changed when I saw her smile and her glance. She had a unique pair of eyes that were common for them to lose myself in her look. She had eyes of an oblique and disguised gypsy. Her voice was the safest sound that I've ever heard in my life. No matter where we were, if I heard that sweet and calm voice of hers, it was home. I could not get any sleep without remembering that the most amazing person in the world was reduced to a pile of meat and blood in a maze of automotive wreckage. Now, I have no home. I leave my apartment much earlier in the morning than I was supposed to. I sit in a coffee shop booth and I just wait until work starts. I get all extra hours of work available. I just could not be in that apartment without her. The place was just for me to sleep and take care of the cat. She loved that cat, but I didn't like him very much back in the day. He was nothing like other cats. He didn't purr. He didn't cuddle with anyone. He just minded his own business. He did not like anyone bossing him around, just like her. She loved that cat the minute she saw him in the animal shelter. He was severely malnourished and hurt. His previous owners hit and tortured him. They tied his neck into a very tight rope and refused to feed him properly. He was found on the street, barely alive. The animal shelter and people managed to take care of him, but he had lost an eye and partial vision in the other eye. She took him home and took care of him as if he was a child. In a few weeks, his fur, before gray and shallow, now was a deep sea of black and thick hairs. He was strong again, but he never recovered his ability to love humans again. They have hurt him, and he has not given another chance to anyone. But I could not just get rid of him. As tough and severe as he was, I learned to love that cat. He was a solid reminder of her character, of her ability to choose the other before herself. She was a pure human being, and every day I was thankful to the universe for putting her in my life. His fur reminded me of her black thick hair. The smell of her hair when we were cuddled provoked the most comforting feeling of my life. If anyone could extract that scent, I would take baths in that thing, just to feel that again. After a few months, I decided to paint the walls purple. She always wanted that, but every time she mentioned it, I said to her that no one with a good pair of eyes would like to see a purple wall. Now I see the irony of that, as I loved her eyes very much. I managed to paint the house in one weekend. It was easy, as the apartment had almost no furniture. I couldn't imagine her painting with me, her clumsy and silly hands with drops of paint in it. I could hear the laughter in my head, imagining her making some joke to cheer me up as I painted the walls. Unfortunately, I painted the whole apartment in sharp and cold silence. As I finished, I laid on the couch and ordered some food. She didn't like to order food, and we always prepared our meals. But I was too tired to cook. Her favorite meal was teriyaki chicken, followed by a cup of coffee and about 2 hours of sex. She always cooked, and I always did the dishes. I would often stand in the kitchen just to see her cooking. I fell asleep on the couch before the food arrived. I had to give a good tip to the doorman that paid for the pizza himself, and hold it for me until the next morning. That morning, I woke up with the cat sleeping and purring on my lap. I have never seen him doing anything like this. I thought that he was just missing her too and sensed her scent on the couch. I felt strangely well that morning. I was even able to smile on the way to work. After seeing my neighbor trying to get his newspaper and accidentally dunking it into the water on the curb, it took me 4 months to be able to smile since her death. During the work, I came up with a list of things that she always said that she would like to do. Some crazy stuff, but the majority were doable. She was a little bit crazy, and that made me love her more. Honoring her life by realizing myself her wishes was a pleasurable thing for me to do. She would have wanted it. I was never an adventurer or a risk taker. She always pushed me to do crazy things and enjoyed experiencing new stuff. I think that her legacy on that would be a nice thing to reproduce. I would like to be that person that she would like for me to be when we were together. I thought to start with the simple stuff like home remodeling, as I was already started with that because the purple walls. When I came home after work that day, I started one of her wishes, to paint a mural in the living room. She had drawn a beautiful illustration on Photoshop already. It was a gorgeous image about the zodiac signs, every single one with a different color, some mystic symbols as well, and a lot of subtle lines. We never painted anything together. I was afraid that we might move someday, and it was going to be a lot of trouble repainting that. I did not do so many things with her because of my cowardice and selfishness, and I regret it every day of my life. I deprived myself of many things with her because of my attachment to my comfort zone. I am disgusted by the way I acted. I started a draft of the mural on the wall that day. I was never an artistic person, but I was impressed that I managed to do something that resembles some kind of beauty. I did not feel time pass. It was already 2 a.m., and I needed to wake up at 6 a.m. I felt less bad with myself doing something that had to do with her memory. I just laid on the bed and slept after that. In the middle of the night, I woke up to get some water and to pee, and I felt something different when I stepped out of the bed. I unfolded the sheets and I saw that little bastard again. He was sleeping rolled up and purring. Finally, the cat is starting to like people, I thought. I drank water, peed, went back to bed, and I grabbed the cat and put him right under my arm. I wanted to see what was the limit of his friendliness, and surprisingly, he just straightened up himself and started sleeping again. I felt happy about that, and I slept cuddled with him. His dark fur reminded me so much of her thick black hair. He even smelled like it. I fell asleep imagining her laying in bed with me. I wake up refreshed, just like the way I used to before the accident. On my way to work, I went to the paint store to ask the vendors about what kind of paint to use on a wall to get the colors right too. I spent much more than I was expecting, but it was worth it. She didn't care much about money anyways. She always wanted me to travel to experience new things, but I was afraid of blowing our money traveling instead of investing it. I would burn all of my money right now just to hug her one more fucking time. Getting home, I started to prepare the paints for the mural. Not caring about my dinner at all, but the cat cared about his food though. I was so focused on the mural that I forgot to feed him. Getting home, I started to prepare the paints for the mural. Not caring about my dinner at all, but the cat cared about his food though. I was so focused on the mural that I forgot to feed him. He reminded me by walking between my legs with his tail upwards, rubbing himself against me. It was the first time that I saw him do that either. I quickly fed him and returned to focus on the mural. I got the laptop open with the original image. I remembered when that week that she ordered the laptop. She wanted it for years. And when she finally was able to afford it, she ordered it online. I remembered how I smiled when I saw her coming home with that package. Her joyfulness and excitement that day almost put joyful tears in my eyes. I was up at 3 a.m. that night, but I managed to paint Aries and Sagittarius. I passed out sleeping, but the cat didn't come to sleep with me. I woke up nauseous that morning, with a slight headache too. Going to the kitchen to get me a glass of milk, I realized that I forgot to turn off her laptop. I was going to close it, but I clearly remembered that it had the picture of the mural open, and now it was just a text archive. I glanced at it, and I didn't recognize it at all. I just assumed that the cat was walking over the keyboard, and he opened up an old text that she would have written. But when I unpretentiously started to read that, I realized that I wasn't going to get up for that glass of milk. The cat was standing on the side of the laptop, completely still. He observed me in the most identical way as she used to look at me. I could see the deepness in his yellow eyes. I've never noticed that. He had a cynical expression. He witnessed me when I read the whole text. It was poorly written, with many typos, and the words were misspelled, awkwardly, like if someone tried to write it with their elbow. I read that fucking thing more times than necessary. The style of the writing, the unusual words, all of that was definitely her writing. I could perfectly imagine her saying every word of it. It was just like reviving experience. In the letter, she apologized for leaving me too early. And she also declared her eternal love for me again. She told me that as much as she wanted to write to me, time was the essence, and the letter needed to be as short as possible. Lose time writing about losing time, and the writing was a thing that she would do easily. She was very polite and clumsy. It was very hard to read that with so many tears in my eyes. She told me that she went to hell and that she was there for the most of what feels like a century. She said that time passes differently in hell. She was suffering a lot and she doesn't think that she deserved that much. She said that life in hell is a nightmare. There is no peace, only fear and pain. She stated that I wouldn't want to know what happens in hell. The only thing that she tried to say was, "Get me out of here." She also told me how she had written a letter. The things that people call demonic possession is just a person that lives in hell communicating through a martyr. A martyr is a being that has passed through great suffering in their lives. And with that, they put their souls next to the divine and the dead. Usually the person that is possessed by the demons is in great suffering, physically or mentally. Becoming a martyr, the inhabitants of hell are usually very violent and brutal, as they spend so much time in hell trying to avoid suffering that they forget how to be civilized. She was relatively new to hell, only a few decades in her time. She told me that there was a way to bring her back through the dead, through a ritual, to put her soul into a new body so she could arise again. I would only need a few things, like a personal item of hers, some goat blood, a little bit of gold, a few candles, and a place that she spent a lot of time. She suggested our living room. But I would also need a reciprocal for the ritual, a fresh killed body that her spirit would be able to take. She told me that it was impossible to get into an adult spirit. The younger the spirit was, the more likely the ritual would be succeeded. She told me to be strong and to hurry up. She was suffering a lot down there, and the time that I spent up here passes a lot slower in hell. Our cat was a martyr, and she slowly took control of him and wrote that letter using a little pause as her final move of strength. That astonished me. That shit was unbelievable. Probably somebody messing with me in a very sick way. I read that thing over and over again. I recognized her in that text, her style of the writing, the words that she usually used with me, everything. I felt her presence with me when I was reading that. The deep look in the yellow eyes of the cat consumed me. Reading that made me feel ill. My stomach hurt a lot. I felt like puking and my head was killing me. My mind was shuffling itself. I could not think of anything solid. I felt lost in myself. I tried to sleep, but I had a couple of fever dreams, one more horrible than the other. I felt physically impotent and empty. I could not divide very well being reality and fantasy. Everything was a nightmare, and I couldn't get out of there. I took a bunch of sleeping pills to force me to sleep. I slept for 37 hours straight. I woke up very thirsty and tired, but at least I felt in reality again. After recomposing myself, I began to think about the letter more clearly. I broke down the letter by phrase. I analyzed every single word. I read that thing so many times that I memorized it perfectly, including the typos and the errors. I could recite it right now if I wanted. I opened up my text history with her. I was avoiding to remember how happy I was with her, even just texting, but I had to compare it word by word. All of that matched. I'm not an expert on linguistic analyzation, but I had analyzed that in so many different ways that I was so sure that the letter had to be hers. I spent weeks researching what kind of ritual, hoping that it wouldn't be true, but I found some reports of demonic possessions, a few antique guides of demonic evocation, and a lot of stuff about soul transfer. I spent incalculable hours collecting data and studying that kind of thing. I was an atheist, but that shit made more and more sense. After those weeks, I can proudly say that I should have been one of the world's biggest specialists on that subject. I knew every single historical detail of it. I knew every written report of that kind of ritual, and I knew every variable. The hope that there was a chance for me to see her made me do that. In all of her life, she tried to make me abandon my agnostic and irrational way of thinking, and after death, she finally managed to do it. The idea of an afterlife scared me, and the idea of my sweetheart being sent to hell revolted me. She told me that she experienced supernatural presences sometimes in her life. I doubted her in my mind, but at that moment, I knew that I was wrong my whole life. I was sad to be wrong all my life, but I was relieved at some point. The blame for not doing the ritual and letting her trapped in hell consumed me. On the other side, I was going to kill a child. I never harmed anyone in my whole life. I never had a physical fight with anyone. I've even never seen blood in front of me. The remote idea of kidnapping a child to kill her was absurd. But the idea of having her back in my life was begin to overlap it. And the possibility to begin to grow in the deepness of my mind. I arranged every other object necessary for the ritual. I even managed to do things in a more specific way than the way that she described it to me. I wanted that to be perfect. I was sure that I wasn't going to fulfill the ritual, but it was nice for me to have all of that preparation. It was the minimum that I could do for her. But killing a child was still off the question. Living with that in my mind was impossible, but I couldn't get a meal, take a shower, read a book without thinking of the horrible things that she was suffering in hell. While I was here, she loved to describe things to me. I could imagine how horrible the hell was for her to not describe it to me. I had some suicidal thoughts in that period too. I almost provoked a frontal collision on purpose. Twice, actually. But the other drivers managed to dodge me. I pretended to have issues about my security just to buy a gun from a friend of hers. I told him that I wanted a gun for auto protection. It was true, in some way. I couldn't get any proper sleep or eat anything in that period. Every food disgusted me, and when I tried to close my eyes, I had the feeling of a delusional nightmare again. I felt weak. I wasn't in control of my life anymore. The inertia moved me day by day. The only thing I felt was pain. That pain intensified as I looked at the ritual set up in our living room. If I am almost giving up anyway, what's the matter if I try it before? That thought slowly took control of my head. I started to make some plans for that, just to occupy my mind. The neighbor's daughter. A 9-year-old little girl with an adorable smile, with long, black, and thick hair. I was her babysitter many times when her parents were out. They trusted me. But that trust was negligible compared to my pain. She was just 9 years old. She didn't live enough for her death to be a tragedy. Her parents were young. They would probably just have another kid anyways. I fantasized about cutting the little girl's hair kinda short, for her to be like the hair of my sweethearts. I was able to see her taking the body of that little girl and running away with me. The physical form was not gonna bother me. Her presence in my life would be so strong that this fact would be a minor detail. I could imagine her arising in a fragile body and hugging me, wetting me up with the tears that she piled up in hell. To make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. She always said to me when she broke something with her clumsy and silly style of doing things. She was right about that. But I never thought that I would have to break an egg. She was alone at home every day from 2 to 6 p.m. Because her parents were working. It took me 2 weeks to finally have the courage to knock on the neighbor's door to take her. She answered the door, tiptoeing, and greeted me with a big smile saying my name. She let me in. She had no clue. She saw that I was crying and shaking. She sat by my side on the sofa and started to pass her hand on top of my hand, as you do with a dog. This girl was very sweet and reminded me of her so much. I had to knock her out in the head with a baseball bat. It was the most despicable thing that I did in my life. I tied her up using shoelaces. I put duct tape over her mouth and I put her in the right place for the ritual. I was disgusted by what I just did, but I was just a little bit proud of myself to finally be able to sacrifice something for her. Most of the ritual went fine. I rehearsed this many times per day, I must say. It was not easy to do that with that frightened look staring at me. but I knew that it was going to be worth it. The final part of the ritual was the worst one. I had to suffocate her to death. It was very painful for me and took a lot of time to finally kill her. I used a shoelace to strangle her to death, which left some marks. After I did that, I fell to the floor crying. Part of me is hopeful. Any moment from that point, the fallen body the little girl would arise as my beloved partner. But I was almost throwing up in disgust, for I had killed an innocent 9-year-old girl, and her corpse was right by my side, lifeless, big eyes staring at me. I stood in the living room all night, but her body didn't move an inch. It read that in some cases the spirit could get lost and it would take more time from them to take over the body, so I waited and waited. I was able to perceive some presence in the room. I sensed that she was there with me. I fell asleep hugged in the corpse, hoping to wake up with her by my side. I woke up to the sound of flies. Her mouth was dripping blood and full of flies. There were some flies landing in her eyes too. I closed them. The neighbors had noticed her missing on the same day of the course. The whole building helped them look for her, including me. I was beyond suspicion. I was very truthful for them. I did not feel any kind of empathy for them, strangely. For 3 days, I waited on. On the morning of the first day, she started to smell. I covered up with some plastic films to avoid bugs on her, but the smell seemed to be more potent. I tried to stay by her side all the time. I knew that if she woke up and did not see me there, she would really be upset. I had to leave the apartment to fake look for the girl and to buy some deodorants and air fresheners. It worked for the first 2 days. On the third day, I started to realize the corpse was very pale. The smell was indescribable, and she started to swell up. That smell was a mixture of rotten flesh, organic gases, and feces, but it had a unique velvety smell, and that smell reminded me not to give up. Giving up was a very hard decision. I hesitated for days, but there was no way that that corpse could be an acceptable reciprocal. I suffered more than those days than I suffered in my whole life. Not only the love of my life was dead, but now I was a murderer. I would not wish 1/3 of my suffering to the worst person in the world. I put that corpse in the tub, and I sat in the bathroom door, thinking of how I was able to dispose of that body. It came relatively easy, I must say. At that point, my spirit and my mind were so broke that I started to do those things more calmly and coldly. I was already fucked, and my whole life was already a sad mess. I had nothing else to lose. I went to the local Walmart and bought 10 big Tupperwares. Every time I went down to that Walmart, I would buy myself a pack of mixed nuts. That was the first time in 4 years that I didn't get one. I didn't feel like eating. I also went to the hardware store and bought a saw too. I even dared to ask for the help of an employee. He helped me choose the best saw for bones. He thought that I was some kind of hunter, I think. Getting home, I could smell her before opening the front door. Something should have been done fast. I knew that if I started to think about it, I wouldn't do it. So I entered the bathroom with a face mask, gloves, and just in my underwear. I had a few clothes didn't want to ruin with the blood. To help me muffle the sound of the cutting through her bones, I put a playlist to play on my cell phone. I had not touched the Spotify app since the accident. The playlist selected was her playlist. I didn't care anymore. I just pressed play. I started to cut out her arms and the sound of Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis Presley. I did all the process as mechanical and as quick as possible. I threw up in just 2 minutes. First, when I cut her belly up in that brown liquid full of maggots and feces drained on the tub. And second, when I was putting her head in the Tupperware, and by 1 inch it did not fit. I grabbed the head by the hair and smashed it against the tub floor. It fitted perfectly after that. Her body filled up to the top 9 Tupperwares, and I managed to let it drain all the liquid before. Containers now were in the trunk of my car. I drove very far from town. I didn't used to do that, or go that far. And then I buried them under an abandoned factory. I knew that place because my sweetheart had taken a photo shoot right there. She looked so beautiful in those pictures. I wasn't crying, shaking, or nervous anymore. I was just pointless. Those things that I did ruined my perspective of life. I was an empty shell without a drop of hope. From that point on, I was just existing. My days floated like a balloon in the middle of a storm. I could not think of anything. I could not eat or sleep properly. All of my time was spent researching suicide techniques. I couldn't support any of more pain. This would be an act of mercy for myself. She would understand that. The amount of suffering was enough for any human being. There was nothing more in life that would make me happier than death. The day that I died was a Wednesday. I received an email early in the morning from a person responsible for it. The person wrote to me about how he had hacked my Facebook account, how he gathered the data of writing habits of her, how he discovered all of my information reading my journal on Google Drive, how he had drugged my cat, and how he manipulated me for his own pleasure. I did not read the whole email. I had made my mind about 40% in. It had several videos attached to it. Videos that I assume of me killing and hiding the body of that little girl. He sure had some requirements and some shit like not to share the video, but was not worried at all. Nobody and nothing was going to upset me anymore. Nobody would make me sadder. I reached the gun that I bought a couple of days before and shot myself in the head. In a smooth and without hesitation move. Her blue and purple mural was now with red pieces of brain and blood on it. At that moment, I did not care about where I was going. If there isn't an afterlife, great. If there is an afterlife, I would rather live in hell with her forever than live alone in that apartment for one more second. Seconds later, I realized that there was no hell. I wish there was a hell. Hey, thank you for listening. If you made it this far, maybe you should subscribe. I like to thank the author for contacting me when he revised his work. And I hope that it came out as best of my ability. Until next time, it's been Mr. Insomniac.